Okay, so good evening, guys. So yeah, we're going to continue from where we stopped in our last class, right? We're going to be looking at Kotlin flow control, right? But before we get into that, actually, um, I'm going to just cover a few things, right? I'll just look into the basic input and output in Kotlin, right? Then we'll just look at arrays before we then get into the while loop, the for loop, and then the break and continue, right? For those of you who did your task successfully, right? I think you must have encountered the basic input and outputs, but for the sake of others, right? I'm just going to run through it very quickly, right? So yeah, let's start with the output, right? Of course, we've talked about that. We've gotten to use it, right? That the Kotlin output, right? You use the print ln, right? And we also use the print function, right? So we use this function to send output right to the screen, right? For the user to be able to see, right? We've actually tested that out, right? So I could just say print hello, right? And then, of course, when we run that, we actually see we'll get a result that says what hello. Okay, so sorry, need to clear this out. Okay, so we get a statement, we get this hello, right, printed out to the screen as an output, right? So we've looked at that already. We've already talked about the difference between the print ln and and the print, right? So we said the print ln when it prints when it prints to the output, then the cursor goes to the next line, right? The cursor goes to the next line. That's the difference, right? But when you have the print alone, right, it actually just run on the same line. So you can see here when we use the print ln and two times, you can see hello. After it prints the first one, it goes to the next line and prints the next statement. But if we were to use just the print statement, right, we would just have hello. Both of them will be printed out on the same line, right? So that's just your basic input output command. Now, but what of you could have cases, right? But before that, let me also just show you how we get to print variables and what to call literals. We've already done that, right? But let me just run that through quickly. Let's say we have a variable. Of course, we've talked about variable. Let's say we have a variable called let's say score, right? And the score is, let's say, 10, right? So I could just print. So let me do something. So I'm going to print the first one. I'm just going to print score, and then I'm going to print score, right? I can also print score like this. I can also print it this way. So we're just looking at string literals, right? I could also print it this way. Probably I also want to even do a calculation, right? I could also do this plus this. Um, I could also do this. So I think I should use print line so that everything goes to the next line. I could also do score equals and then score, and then I could also just print 10, right? So what happens here? So these are just different ways to, print this. So let me run this and then I'll get to we just get to explain. So sorry, let's use the print ln here so that everything goes to the next line. It's looking so we can better understand it. Okay. So let's run this, right? So you can see the first one, we're basically just printing the string called what? Score. That's basically what we're doing here. So when we just call this variable and it put it in a quote, it sees it as a string. So it just gives us what? Score. But here we are calling the variable, so it prints the value, which is what? 10 here. The third one, we still have the score in quotes, but because of this $sign, it now reads the score as a variable that has a value. So it gets the value, which is 10. Now, still part of your string templates and string literals, right? So you can see it reads this as a string score, this also as a string, but when it gets here, it sees this as a variable, right? And then it prints that out because it has a value. This is still another thing. So we are performing an addition operation here, but we are doing it inside of this curly brace, and we are putting it. So with this $sign, it now treats this as an expression. And the reason we have this curly brace is because we want to have two or more variables there. So, and it's an expression. So we enclose it in that what curly what brace, right? And then of course you can just print the 10. So these are just basically your output stuff, right? Now, but for the input, or assuming you want to get an input from the user, right? You want the user to be able to impute something, and then you take in that input and give it back to the user after maybe performing whatever operation you want to perform, right? So how can we actually do that? How can we take input from the user, right? So that is also, that's not really, it's not difficult. So I'll just start by saying print ln, right? I could just, first of all, it's more like a prompt, enter text, right? This is just like a prompt. I want to just prompt the user, okay, to enter a text, right? Okay, so this will just be printed out to the user, right? So when I run this just prints the user, informs the user, hey, okay, enter the text, right? Here, he wants me to print. But now I want to be able to read what the user is actually going to type in, right? So when you're reading that, you definitely have to store it, right? You have to store what the user is actually going to type in. So that means we're going to create a variable. So I'm going to call this var input, right? And then I'm going to use a method called read line, just like this. So you just get to use it like this, right? So this will read line. We'll talk about a few things much later, like null. I know I mentioned it, right? So this is just like a null check, right? This is just like a null check. Also tells the compiler that it's possible for these inputs to actually have nothing, right? Because have you ever just used the calculator, you turned it on and you just press equality sign? You have not typed in anything, you just press equal to, right, on the calculator. Yes. So you're telling the so just to avoid it from crashing, because you can't actually perform nothing. You can't perform something with nothing, right? So to avoid the system to crash and everything, we have to use that null check. So after reading the line, so after doing a read line, so this actually prompts the user, right? This gets whatever the user types in, and then we'll store it in this variable called input, right? And then I can now print it out back to the user by saying you entered this word. So what's the word? I'll call it the variable, but I'll call it like this, input, right? So let's run this. So when we run this, so using our one compiler, which we're going to be using moving forward, right? It's actually a very interesting ID. Okay, so first of all, let's see. We have an exception, which is a null pointer exception, right? Which is basically what I talked about. So but let's see. Okay, so that's our read line, and then that's right. So no exception. So you can see you entered this word try. The word there is what? Try, right? The word is what? Try. So that's actually that. So you may be thinking, what happens if I actually take this out, right? What happens if I actually take this out? Well, let's see. The code will actually run, right? But if I don't put in anything and run it, right? So let's see. No, you get to really understand this when you use when we get into Android development, right? The whole concept of a null pointer exception, because it is possible that the user doesn't enter anything and we need to actually account for that. So you see, when I run it, you see that it gives what? Null here, right? It gives what? Null. So we need to avoid, this, right? It's possible that the user actually gets null. And then imagine if we were to perform an operation, right? Let's say we wanted to get, okay, let's get an integer input, right? So let's use that to explain this, because it's possible to get, maybe you want to get an integer, right? So what we do, if you want to impute not just integers, maybe other data types, we use what to call a scanner object, right? We use what to call a scanner object. And to do that, we first of all do this. We import the class. Don't worry, we'll get to some of these things. You just need to know it. You may not have to be typing it later, right? But just know it. So we import this scanner class. So this helps us to actually so we'll actually read the inputs, whatever the user types, and we're able to convert it, right? We're able to actually convert it to maybe an integer or something, right? So after importing this, how do you now use it, right? So let's do a tweak to this. So let's say enter a number, right? Enter a number. So that's just a statement. But before that, we'll create an instance. We'll just do this before that, right? I'll create a variable called reader, so that to read, and then I'm just going to have scanner and then system. This is a Java stuff though, but you can use this system.in, right? Okay, so but let me get my I need my backtick, hold on. Okay, .in, right? So this actually just creates an instance that will take the input from the standard input keyword, right? So you can just know this for, just have that at the back of your mind, right? And then after that, so in my inputs now, I'm now going to say, now remember, I want my inputs to be a number, right? I want it to be a number. By default, the read line gets strings, but I want it to be a number. So what I'll just do is I'll use this instance called reader, right? Which reads what the user actually is going to type. And then after I get it, I'll convert it to an integer using the method called .nextInt, right? .nextInt. So basically just know that this reader is like, it's called an object. You'll get to know more about object and classes, right? But just have that at the back of your mind. It's actually an object that is used to take input from the user, right? Okay, so after taking that input, they will convert it to an integer using this .nextInt and store it here, right? So I can say you entered this number and then input. So let's test this out, right? Now, the thing is, you don't actually need to do this per se, because here we actually have this, but sorry, I made a mistake. It should be reader, not read here. So that's why it prompted me and pointed and did this here. So okay, so let's enter a number. Let's say 5. Let's say 5. So you can see you entered this number 5. So what if I want to say input times 5, right? So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to do an operation which is 5 times what? 5, right? So I should see you entered 5. So it gives me just 5 times 5. It just reads this as a string. But if I wanted to perform that operation, right, I'll just put both of them in this curly brace. So it will now perform it as an expression. Else what it just did was read one input as a variable, and then 5 is just 5 as a normal string. But if I wanted to perform that operation, I will now put it in this curly brace. So you can see you entered 25. Okay, so but what happens when we take this out? When we don't put in anything and we want to run run this, right? So you can see we have this it doesn't actually run. Enter a number. So let's say I put nothing and run it. I don't put anything. So it's more like saying I want to do nothing times 5, right? Which doesn't actually make any sense, right? Nothing times 5. Okay. So that's actually how you get inputs. So I showed you for string, and then I showed you for how you can also convert it to an int. You can actually convert to um um you know a float using the next float. You can convert it to double using next double. You can convert it to boolean using next boolean, right? And then you can convert it to long using next long, right? So I'm just going to leave that up to you to play around with, right? Okay, so that being said, we'll switch to Kotlin arrays, right? Arrays basically are just so let me okay. So arrays basically are used to store multiple
Please,
values in a
can
single.
you put this thing on comment? We can copy it.
Okay. So, okay. You mean this, right? This is what you mean?
Yes, yes,
Hello? Okay.
yes.
Okay. So let's talk about arrays, right? So arrays, right, are okay. You want me to also put this? Okay. Okay. Arrays are used to store values, not just values, right? To store multiple uh, multiple values in a single variable, right? In a single word variable. So instead of creating separate variables for each value, right, use arrays to store multiple values for in a single word variable, right? So how do you create an array? It's very simple. Let's say of course you're storing it in a single variable, right? So let's create a variable called car or cars, because we're going to use multiple. So you create a variable by just saying um array of right? And then you pass in the various variables. So array of course, Volvo is a string. So Volvo, let's say Ford, let's say BMW, right? So that's how you create what an array. So these are an array of strings, right? Because they are in what a double quote. These are an array of what strings, right? Volvo, Ford, and then what BMW, right? So how can you access the elements? So each of them are elements of the array called cars, right? So each of them are what's called elements. Each of them are called what elements, right? So how can you access each of these elements? Now you access them using their index number, right? You access each of these elements using their what index number. Their index number also means their position. Now if you look at this my slide, you notice that my first slide I called it 00, second one 01. I think so. I remember telling you guys this. So the first element here is the first index 0. Next one is 1. The next one is 2. I feel like I've talked about this before, right? But let's just finish up though. So assuming I want to print the first element, right? So all I'm just going to say is print line, and then I'll call my variable cars, and then I use this block braces to say 0. Yeah, I think I did this with you guys. So maybe I'm just running through it because we want to go into loops, right? So that's also fine. So this prints out what Volvo, right? So that I think that's that. You can also replace an element there, right? I could actually just say um, um, before I print that, I could say cars of 0, index 0. So the the element in index 0 should I want to put what car will I use? I just need something short. Master, right? And then print it. So instead of Volvo, here, when printing this, we should have master, right? Because we have changed the element, right? That is in the 0 index. Okay, so I think that's that. And then of course you can get the size. So I think I did this with you guys, right? But let me just run through. You can also print the size of an array, right? By just saying cars.size, right? And then this will give you the size of the array. So the size of the array basically is the number of elements, right, in that what array, right, which is 3. And then also you could check if an element actually exists, right, using the in operator, right? So I can say if let's say Ford, which is a string, in cars. So we use the in operator, right? What do we do? Of course, we have done the if stuff before. Say print, let's print it exists, right? Else, if it's not there, you should just print it doesn't exist. Okay, so when we run that, right? So to check, so if Ford is in what our array of cars, what do? We print it exists, else it doesn't exist. So you can print that and you can see it exists, right? So I want to ask a question. What happens if I make this a small letter f? What will be the result? What will be the result if I make this a small letter f? You can reply on the chat or you can just, okay, Prosper, go ahead.
Um, I guess it would give it doesn't exist.
Okay, that's fine, Prosper. Any other person? Oyebola say does not exist. Okay, who else? Anybody else want to chip in? Anybody else? Anybody else on the chat, or you can unmute and speak? So only both of them. The rest, they don't want to say anything. They're not sure. Okay. So let's run this and then let's see. Go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is it doesn't exist because searching is type sensitive.
Thank you very much. So it doesn't exist. It's type word sensitive. So small letter f in Ford. So they are not the same, right? They are not what the same. So it doesn't what exists. Okay. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. I like that. I like that. We're following. So now, so that brings us to loops, right? That brings us to what loops. I need to touch this because when we are going to talk about loops, we're definitely going to need the knowledge of an array, right? We need to have a bit of an understanding of arrays. That's why I decided to, kind of just touch that a bit, right? So, but before we get into it, let's see. So we're going to look at while loop, for loop, and then the break and continue, right? We'll look at that, right? So let's get things started. So loops basically, right? Loop is used. Okay, Ima has a question. Okay, go ahead. You could have just raised your hand.
Okay, I'm so sorry, sir.
It's fine.
I came in a bit late, so I've been looking at, I kind of understand the if and the else of this other down code, but then this array, I've been looking at it. I do not understand the cars. Okay, I know that the variable car is being assigned array, this array, but then the second code, I don't seem to get it.
Okay, that's fine. Let me just run that through. Okay, so that it's not do you the more you look, the less you see. Okay, so
Thank you.
we have we're talking about arrays, right? So we said arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable. So instead of having to create a variable store Volvo, create another variable store Ford, create another variable store BMW, we can create a single variable and store multiple values, right? So we said this is the syntax, right? Since it's a variable, we have a variable called cars. So we use the method array of to create what an array of what strings. So because this why I say strings is because we are actually what using strings. We could actually use integers also. Can create an array of integers. So an array of means multiple values of, right? Okay, so we have Volvo, Ford, and then BMW, which are strings. So we said we can access here. We're basically modifying, the elements in the zero index. So index, like we said, just basically means position, right? Every elements, each of them are called elements here of this array, right? Every element occupy a position. So we start our positioning count from 0 down. So we have 0, 1, 2. I think we talked about that before, right? So here we're basically just changing the elements in the 0 what index. That's what we are doing. So the element here in the 0 index is Volvo, right? So where we change it, we now print it out. We print that particular what element in this 0 index, and that's what gave us this Mazda. Of course, here is just we printing out the size. You can print out the size of the array, which I said the size of the array just means the total number of elements in that array. Is that okay?
Yes, sir, it's okay. But then just to be clear, the about the index stuff, I remember when
Yeah.
we did okay, when we did normal indexing, we kind of like counted each alphabet, like from 0. That's like, say, for Volvo, we start with V0 and O1. But here, I think I'm seeing that the entire element in a string belongs to one, like Volvo itself is 0. Then
Okay.
do we also count the space in here? Because I remember we did
Okay. Okay, so that one, right? Well, yes, that's what made me remember that we have done that. No, so that one, what we are doing is we were getting the index in a string, right? So we were doing, let's say this is what we were doing. So let's say our name, right? And then let's say Ima, right? Sorry, let me capital letter. Mhm. Okay, so this is what we are doing. And we said we could actually get the index of each of these, right? So we were actually treating a string, but here we are treating an array of elements, right? Array of strings. Here we're looking at strings, which strings are made up of what a sequence of characters, where we said we could do something like this, name, and then say 0, or let's say 1. So this is what you're talking about, right?
yes.
So that's a different thing. So here now we are actually looking at what an array of what elements, right? These are, each of them are different what strings. So we are not actually playing with strings directly. No, we are looking at an array. So you can see we have M here. So it's good you actually even remember that. That's fine. So remember this one too in the next class.
Oh,
Okay,
okay, thank you, sir.
you're welcome. So let's move on. So we're talking about loops, right? So basically, loops loops are loops are used to repeat a specific block of code. Remember, when I say block of code, right? I'm just saying, the code, whatever that is written in this curly brace from here to here, right? So loops are used to repeat a specific block of code until a certain condition is met. Okay, so we repeat it until a certain condition is met. Just like when you're mixing your tea, your instruction, they tell you stir for whatever, right? You keep on stirring, you keep on turning that spoon until you what meet a condition that whatever condition you set that defines that your tea is ready to be consumed, right? So you put in your sachet Milo, you put in your sachet milk, right? Whether it's dry or whatever, and then you're stirring and stirring and stirring till you get to a point, right? So there's to whatever condition you've set, right? Probably it could your condition could be that when you're no longer seeing any solid Milo or something like that, or when it has achieved gotten to a certain mix or color or whatever, right? There's a condition that you have to meet for you to be able to take out that spoon, right? Drop it, take that cup, and cup that's tea or whatever, right? So that's what loops are used for. So you repeat a certain block of code, certain instructions, certain sequence of instructions until a condition is met. And of course, we have the syntax here. So this there are different types of loops, right? So we're going to talk about the while loop, the for loop, right? Then we're also going to talk about break and continue, right? We're going to talk about break and continue. So the thing is this: loops are what actually makes what's it called, computers actually interesting. Because let's take for instance, right? Let's even, okay, I think I'm just going to comment this out. Let me just comment this out again, since you guys said I should. So let's look at this. Assuming I want to print, let's say I have a variable called name, and I'm still going to use Emma here. So assuming I want to print this name 50 times, right? What does that mean? That means I'll do this. I'll continue for how many times? 50 times. Imagine you want to print it 1 million times. I don't know if you're getting. Imagine you want to now print it 1 million times. So it's actually what's stressful. It will consume a lot of resource and that. But that's where loops would come in, right? That's where loops actually would come in. So we'll be looking at the while loop. We'll also look at do while, and then we'll look at the for loop, right? Yeah, I believe we should be able to finish all that today. So this is the so for the while loop, this is the syntax, right? So we just say while, which is the keyword, and then we pass in an expression, right? And then open up our curly brace, and then we have this block of code. So what does this do? What this does is this: we give it a test expression, right? So an expression, something we want it to actually execute, right? So a condition, right? You can actually use the word condition. So, but a condition also could be an expression, right? Expression is just like saying maybe x equals 2, right? Whatever. So we come in here, we'll give it a text expression, and it checks if this text expression is true. Then it executes the word body of the word loop. So the body of the loop is this block of code, right? It executes the body of the loop. Now, after it does that, it goes back to the condition or the test expression, evaluates it again. If it's true, it comes back, executes the block of code, goes back. So it continues doing that until the condition becomes what? False. And then when the condition becomes false, it goes out of that block of code, right? So let's do a test, right? Let's test this out. Let's create a so I'm going to just say, let's create a variable. Let me just say var I equals 1, right? So I'm going to say while, and then I'm going to pass in an expression, right? While 1i rather is less than or equal to 5, print let's say, let me look for trouble. Print Emma, and then I'm going to call I, right? Good. Okay. And then I'm going to do something. Okay, let's just do this. Let me just do that first. So what am I doing here? So while I, what is our I? The value of I here is 1, because 1 is being stored in. So that basically I'm saying while 1 is less than or equal to 5, print Emma, and then put the what value of what? I. So let me ask a question. Is 1 less than or equal to 5? Is I less than? So this, remember, looking here, we said if the expression is true, it will run the body of the what? Code, right? The body of the loop or the code block, right? If it is true. So the question is, I less than or equal to 5. Is it true or false? You can use the chat, or you can just unmute and answer. So is it true or false? I less than 5. Is it true or false? I less than or equal to 5, rather. Anybody? Okay, so Ima says it's true. Yes, it's true, because I here is 1, and 1 is less than 5. Though it's not equal to, but of course, we are saying less than or equal to. So this is true. So because this is true, it will then run this print statement here. So let's do that. Let's click on that, and then let's see what we have.
Yes.
Okay, so you can see it prints Ima 1, But look at this. It keeps printing and printing and printing, like it's going till it got so tired, right? Of course, if you are using this in an ID, at some point you even get an I think out of bounds error, right? If we're even using the other one now. But the question is, why is it doing this? It continues executing this code, remember, because this I less than or equals to 5 is what true. So just like you continue stirring your maybe for people who do semovita, you continue stirring till it gets to a point where you can what stop. So you need something. So it means that at some point we need to make sure that this code stops, else it will continue running, because 1 will always be less than or equal to 5. This is always true. So what do we do? We can just, to actually curb that, I'm now going to, so what I'm going to do is, after it runs this, I want to increase the value of what I. So I want to increase the value of what I. So I could just say, use this, right? So this will increase I by what? 1, right? So that means after it runs this, after it executes, prints this, it will increase I. So sorry, not 1, I. Yes. So it increases I. So that means I now becomes what? 2. It checks 2 less than or equal to 5. That's true. It prints it out, prints this out, and then increase I. I no longer is 2. I now becomes what? 3. So that's basically that. So it will keep doing that until this becomes what? False. Right? Until this becomes what? False. So let's see that. So you can see the very first time I was what? 1. So it printed Ima what? 1. And then it increased I to what? 2. Is 2 less than 5? Yes, that's true. So prints what? Ima what? I. Of course, I has been increased to 2. So that means I is now what? 2. And it did that till it got to 5. Now, of course, when it got to 5 here, when I is 5, 5 is equal to 5, right? So it executes this and prints it out. And then 5 is now increased towards 6. So when it runs, you see that 6 is not less than or equal to 5. It doesn't execute this code, right? So that's actually how the while loop what works, right? It's actually pretty much simple. Now, the next one is the do while loop. Now, what this does is that the body, which is the block of code of the do while loop, is executed once before the test expression is what's checked. The text expression, or you can call it a condition, before it is checked, right? So it executes the body. That's why you see the syntax here. It does something, executes the code, and then checks the condition. So you can see this diagram here. So if it is arrow, so it does something, right? After it does it, it now goes to the expression. If the expression or condition is true, it goes back and does that same thing again, right? It continues until the expression becomes what? False, then it doesn't go back. So let's look at an example for the do while what loop, right? Let's look at an example for the do while loop. Okay, so what can we use? Let's just do something. Do I still have to comment this? I'm commenting a lot of things for you guys. Okay, we can keep going down though. Okay, so let's create a variable called sum and assign 0 to it, right? Then I'm going to create a variable called input, which is going to be of type string, right? I'm just declaring it, right? I didn't initialize the input. So I want to do something. Do what? What do I want to do? Do, let's say, print line, enter enter a, right? And then input is equal to read line. We want to read the input of the user, right? And then after reading the input, I want to now update the sum variable. I'm going to do this. I think I showed us this, right? Input, right, dot to int. This is more like a conversion. I want to convert the input to an integer. Okay, so do this while the input is not equal to 0. So I'm going to explain this, right? And then I'm going to now print line sum equals sum. So what are we doing here? Now, we want to do something before we first of all check for a condition, right? So what are we doing? What we want to do is this. First of all, we want to print this, right? To prompt the user to enter an integer. Then, of course, we want to read the string, whatever the user is going to type in. We have already talked about input. We want to read it. Whatever the user types in, the user gets it as a string. So we store it here in this variable called input. Now, in our sum, we already said that the sum is 0. And we notice we used a var. And that's the only reason we can update it. If we had used a val, this wouldn't work. Maybe I'll just text that out. So what is this? This is what a plus assignment operator. We talked about that before. So what it does is it adds and assigns at the same time, right? This is the same thing as saying sum. This is the same thing as saying this. It's the same thing as saying this, right? But instead, we just use the short way by saying what? So this will become 0 plus whatever the user puts in, right? So, but this is a shorter way, just saying plus equals, right? So after it does this, then it will now come here and check. Do it while input is not equal to what? 0 as a string. So as far as the user doesn't put this, right? Then of course, when it leaves this to, it now what prints this. So let's test this out, right? Let's test this out. Okay, so there's no output yet. So let me enter 4. Okay, hope I'm not. Okay, let me enter 4. Okay, sorry, read. Okay, I have an error here. Okay, read line, sorry. Except I think I've missed out something. Hold on. But let's test that out first.
So the input has not been initialized or something like that.
Okay, no, don't worry. I needed to put this. Okay, so let's enter an integer 4. Okay, let's use 4. I'm entering an integer now. So it takes 4, stores here, and converts it to an integer, puts it in sum. So let's see. And then, okay, so let me see. Probably I'll need, okay. It's just a read line now, so we are fine. Let's move to, okay, I think I'm going to, my slide actually ends here. So let's just move to what the next thing that we have, right? So that's the do while loop. So we the next thing we'll look at is the for loop, right? So the for loop also, remember, so basically loop just helps you to, loop basically helps you to iterate over an array or a list or whatever. So iteration means you're just going from one to another to another. You're just going through, right? The elements there, right? So the for loop is used to iterate through arrays, ranges, maps, right? And a lot of things, right? So the syntax for the for loop, right, is just say for, right? And then item, let's say item in array, right? So for then you put your the body of the loop, right? So this is just the syntax, right? This is just the syntax. So this word item could be anything. It could be I, it could be T, it could be whatever you actually want to call it, right? It's just more like a way to access the elements in an array. So you just need something to be able to iterate through them. So let's look at an example, right? A very simple example. I could say for I in, now this is a range, 1 to 5. This is a range, right? This is a range in Kotlin. So for I in 1 to 5, print I, right? So this would, when I run this, this would actually give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's basically what it will give us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what does it do? So the I here is just, like I said, it could be anything. You could use anything, you could name it anything, right? But of course, use something that's kind of is a bit something that relatable, something that explains things better to someone when they read your code. So for I in 1 to 5, print I. So what will it do? It's go into this range, take the first, get into the first elements, right? So what do you want it to do in the first index, right? With that first element, what do you want it to do? We basically just want it to print it. So, it goes to 1 and say, okay, what do you want me to do with 1? Print 1. Okay, prints 1. It goes to the next one. After it does that, it goes again. What do you want me to do to 2? It prints 2. Fine. It goes again. What do you want me to print with the element in the third index? You want me to just print it? Fine. It goes. So that's basically what the for loop actually what does, right? So this is just iterating through a range, right? Now, there are different ways, right? You could actually do that, right? You can actually even just decide to not have what's it called? You can decide not to even have a curly brace, right? You can just decide to do something like this, and it will also work. I'm basically just showing you this just for knowledge sake, right? You could actually do this, and it will also still work, right? So because the thing is, if the body of the loop, you only do this if the body of the loop contains only one statement, right? Because here the only statement it contains here is print this. That's when you actually want to use it. So the curly brace is not necessary, but if there are more than one statement, then you need to actually put that. Okay. So you can also iterate through an array, right? So let me just comment. This is iterating through an array. So you could also iterate, sorry, this is through a range. So you could also iterate through an array, right? So let's say we have, let me create an array called language, right? So I'll just say array of, and then I'll say Python, I'll say Java, I'll say Kotlin, I'll say Ruby. Yep, okay. So what if I want to iterate through this array? That means I want to go from one element to another and then do something with each of the elements, right? Which is basically what that does. So I could just say for item in language, what do I want to do? So for every item in language, what do I want to do? Well, for now, I just want to print the word item. That's all, right? So when I run this, I'm going to have Python, Java, Kotlin, Ruby, right? So because I just want it to print it. That's all I want it to do, right? Just print it. I could do something else with it, but that's fine. So you can also iterate through an array, right, with the index, right, with the word index. Now, how do you do that? You just basically do I'm going to comment this out. You can just say for item in language. So not just language, so I'm going to say language dot indices, right? Language dot indices, right? Which is indices is actually the plural of index, right? Yes. Hold on. Okay. So I'm now going to just do a check. I'll say if item modulo 2, I've done modulo now, right? Where's my modulo? Sorry. If item modulo 2 equals 0, print line the language, the item itself, right, in that language. So this is me iterating. I'm just want to print I just want to print the array elements having an even index. That means their index is an even number, right? That's just what I'm doing, right? Their index is an even number. So when it goes to the first one, the first index is 1. 1 modulo 2, is it 0? It checks. If it is 0, it prints. If it's not, it skips it. It goes to the next one. 1 modulo 2 modulo 2, is it 0? It prints. 3 modulo 2, is it 0? And the like. So when we run that, we should have just Java and okay. So what do we have? We have just Kotlin. Yes. Right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, we have Python 0 modulo 2. Yeah, so we have Python and what? Kotlin, right? We have what? Python and what? Kotlin, because 0 modulo 2, of course, actually is equals to 0. 2 0 1 2 2 modulo 2 is actually equal to 0 and the likes, right? So that gives you Python and what? Kotlin. Okay, so that's how you iterate through an array, right? Using the index, right? You can also iterate through a string, right? You can also iterate through a string. Var name. Let's use our IMA that we've been using, right? IMA, today is your day. Okay, so I could say for letter in name, right? What do I want to do? I just want to print letter. So what will it do is iterate through each of them and print every word letter that comes across. So you should see IMA fetch. Yes. Okay, so that's actually that, right? For the for loop, it's actually very, it's actually very straightforward, right? It's actually very straightforward, very simple, right? So we're running up soon, actually. So the next thing we'll talk about is Kotlin break expression, right? We're talking about break, right? Now, when you're working with loops, right, sometimes it's actually important to terminate the loop immediately without even checking the condition. Sometimes, right? Sometimes you may want to terminate the loop. So terminating the loop means you're ending that whole check, right, of going through and through, right? So in such cases, we use the break keyword. We use break, right? So what it does is that it terminates the nearest loop, the nearest enclosing loop when it actually gets to that break without checking the condition or the test expression. So this is just let me give us an example, right? So using the range, I could say for I in 1 to 10, that's range. And I want to say if I is equal to 5, break. Right? If I is equals to 5, break, and then print line I. So that's actually how you use break. So what would this do? So it comes here. So of course, this will just give us 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for I in 1 to 3, so when it goes in, it checks, is I equal to 5? No, it will not break. Since this is false, it will not execute this guy. So it will print it. And then it goes again. We're going through a range now. So 2 is equal to 5, 3, 4. So immediately 5 is equal to 5. It just breaks, right? Immediately, right? And it doesn't even print this guy. It does not print it. So that's the break, right? It's actually very straightforward. It's actually simple and straightforward, right? Okay. So there's also the last, well, not really last, right? It's not really last. Second to the last. But we have a break called labeled, because this is an unlabeled break. So we have what we call a labeled break. So let me call it here. Unlabeled break, right? But we also have a labeled break. Now, a labeled break basically, right, there's another way of break actually, but we use it to terminate a desired loop. which could be an outer one, right? We'll learn more when we get to use when we get into writing much complex codes, right? But we use it to break a desired loop, a particular loop. You want to break a particular one. Like for example, let's see. I'm going to do a bit of let me just do this, right? So I could say first we use the this is a label, right? Because in Kotlin, right, label in Kotlin starts with an identifier, right, which is followed by what? At, right, which your at symbol. So I say first at for I in 1 to 4, right? Second at, then I'm going to do a second, right? Like remember I said we label with what? An identifier, and then followed with at. So I want to label this second, and then I'll use the at, and then I'll say for let me use J in 1 to 2. So look, I'm using 2 for loops here now, right? Then print line I, right? Sorry, I equals I. I'm using the string template stuff, right? And then J equals J. Okay, so now after printing that, I also want to check. Don't worry, I'll explain better. If I want to check if I is equal to 2. Now, if I is equal to 2, break at first. So you break at this first loop. So when you get to the point, so this is the first for loop. We are iterating through from 1 to 4. Now, inside the circle, we're not creating a for loop inside of it, where we're iterating from 1 to 2. And then we're now printing what I is and what J is, right? And then inside here, we're saying, look, if I is equal to 2, break at what? First, right? So this is the particular loop we want to actually break, not this one. So let's run that. Just going to comment out this one. So we just focus on the result of okay. So let's run this. Let's run this and let's see what we have. So you can see, so the very first time it runs the for loop. So for I in 1, right? After it runs, I now here is what? 1. It comes to the second for loop, J is what? 1, right? It prints it. It checks, is I equal to 2, right? It says no. So the thing about the for loop, right? After J runs, right? This one, the second time, I is still 1. J now is now what? 2. So this one runs, this guy runs finish. This one 1 and then 2, but I is still 1. So this first loop runs, and then inside of the first loop, right, you have a second loop that will run based on the first iteration there, right? Okay, somebody's hand is raised. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, sir. Please, can you
Okay, Abbas, yes.
Yes, evening, sir. Please, can you go over the label breaks again? It's confusing.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's go over it again, right? But we understand the unlabeled break, right, which we had actually talked about, which is this one, right? So let me right? So these are unlabeled break, right? We're using a for loop. So here we are just calling a break, and it will just break this loop, right? Once this condition is what's given. But the unlabeled break is just this one. You're not labeling it. You're not telling, you just call break, but you're not telling the compiler where it should actually break from. And the reason we are doing that is because we just have one for loop, right? We just have one for loop that iterates through this range. So I goes into this range and I is 1, right? So after since I is 1, for the very first time, I is 1, it checks if I is equals to 5, which 1 is not equals to 5. So it doesn't run this. Then it now prints what? 1. which of course, when we run this, you got to see 1 to what 5. Oh, sorry, comment this out. Okay, so let's run this, and then we should have 1 to 5. So 1, right? When I is what? So we are using I. Remember, we said the for loop are basically iterating through a range. So the very first time I is what? 1, right? So it checks here, is I equal to 5? Is 1 equal to 5? No, it doesn't break. It prints I. It goes back again. I now is what? 2, right? I now becomes 2 because it's iterating 2. So it goes to the next element in that range, which is 2. Is 2 equal to 5? No, it doesn't break. It prints 2. Till when it gets to 4, 4 is not equal to 5, so it prints 4. It goes to the next item in this range, which is 5. Is 5 equal to 5? Yes. It now what? Breaks. This break here is called for this particular what? Loop. That's why it's an unlabeled break. But in a labeled break, right, we label it with an identifier. Our identifier here is what? First. It's just a word. It's just a word. You can use anything. But what now validates it is where you put this at here. This at what? Symbol. Right? The at what? Symbol. Okay. So we created a first loop here called that is runs from what? 1 to 4. So you have 4 elements, right? So remember, just like what this does here in a single loop, when I is 1, it does everything that is inside. So this is an inner loop. It's a loop inside of a loop. So I here is 1, right? Let me use a comment. I here is 1 the very first time. And then it comes, because I is 1, every other thing is going to be running is still on the premise of the first element here in this loop. So inside of this loop, right, we have this other loop called J, whereby J is what? Running also from 1 to what? 2. So what happens here is this. At the first time that you run this for loop, I is what? 1. And then it comes here and runs this inner loop, and J is what? 1. Right? Because we are printing this. So this checks here, and J is actually what? 1. So that's why we print this first one. I don't know if you're getting. Now, we come here. We are still in this 1, right? So it runs this second loop again, this inner loop, right? Still, for the fact that we are still in 1, it runs this inner loop again. That's why I is still 1, and J has actually what? Gone to the second what? Element, which is what? 2. But here it is saying that this, if I, at any point that I becomes 2, break this first loop, this first one. So that's why the moment I became 2, right? The moment I became 2, then this second loop actually what? Runs. J becomes what? 1. And then it what? Breaks. Right? So that's why we don't even have J equals 2. We don't have, if not, we should have I2, after having I1, J1, I1, J2, we should, after having I2, J1, we should have I2, J2. But it has already broken, right? It has already what? Broken. So that's actually that. Don't worry, I know you have to, you can go back to the video and then just take it again, slow and steady, right? And then, of course, I'll be happy to also, explain it again. Right, I know for loop can actually be tricky, especially when you have a nested for loop. A nested for loop basically just means a loop inside of a loop, right? When you have a loop inside of a loop, right? That's basically that, right? So yeah, that's actually that. And I think there's one more thing. Right. Okay. So that's basically that for today. For today's class. I don't know if I'm missing out on anything. Let me check my slide. Let me check my slide. Okay. Yeah. So continue. Yes. So just like we have break, we also have continue. Right. Just like we have break, we also have what? Continue, right, as a keyword. So basically continue, that actually like suppose you're working with loops now. Sometimes you want to skip the current iteration of the loop, right? In break, you want to actually terminate at a particular point. In continue, you want to skip the current iteration, right? So in such cases, we use continue. So what it does is skips the current iteration of the loop, the enclosing loop, and then the control of the program jumps to the end of the loop body. So let me just give you an example, right? Still using our for loop. So for I in range of 1 to 5, right? I want to print MCI is always printed, right? Then I want to say if I want to check if I is greater than 1 and remember I've done this before, and I is less than 5, continue. And then print sorry, not always printed. So let's look at this, right? Let's run this and then I'll explain it better with the result, right? So basically, when the value of I, this is just what we're saying. For I in, you can see that. So for I in the range of 1 to 5, print I is always printed. Now, if I is greater than 1 and I is less than 5, continue, and then print I is not always printed. So what are we doing here? So what you notice is this: when the value of I is greater than 1 and less than 5, the continue is what executed, which will skip the execution of what prints this guy, to skip the execution of this guy, right? It will skip the execution of this statement, right? But however, this particular one is what implemented or executed. So, okay, let's just look at it. So the very first time for I in the range, so I becomes 1. Is I greater than 1? So it prints this statement first, right? And then we're now checking. If I is greater than 1, I is 1 now. So is 1 greater than 1? No, right? And is 1 less than 5? Yes. So it now what prints, it now calls this what continue, right? It calls what continue. So you now see that you have what 1 is not always what printed. Now when I becomes 2, 2 is greater than 1, which is true. And at the same time, 2 is also less than what 5, right? 2 is also less than what 5. So it actually what prints what this guy again. Sorry, yeah, it actually just skips. So this does not execute. So you see, it doesn't print this one. It goes to 3. 3 is always what printed. First of all, you see 3 is always what's printed, right? 4 is always what's printed, right? But 5 is always printed. But at the same time, it checks here. 5 is not less than 5. So it now what executes this guy. So that's basically that. So I'm going to take it again, right? When the value of I is greater than 1, and the keyword there is and now, right? It means that it needs to, for this continue to run, this expression must be true. And for it to be true, I must be greater than 1 and it must be less than 5. But when I is 1, right, for this, print this first. So it prints it, which is this first one. And then it checks, is I greater than 1? Right? No. And I is also, yeah, not less than, what's it called? Not less than 5, right? So this is false. This is false, right? So we can now see it prints this, right? But here, 2, when it gets to 2, 2 is greater than 1 and 2 is less than 5. So you see, it doesn't execute continue and it doesn't what what's it called? It doesn't actually print this 2. If not, you would have seen 2 not always printed. When it gets to 3, it prints this. 3 is always what's printed. After it prints this, it checks 3 is greater than 1 and is less than 5. So it doesn't run our continue. So this one is skipped. It doesn't print this. Down to when it gets to what 5. So first of all, it runs this. 5 is always printed here, but it checks. Is 5 greater than 1? Yes. Right? 5 less than 1, 5 less than 5 rather, is actually what's not true. Right? 5 is not less than 5, right? So you now come back what here. So that's actually continue, right, from a break and a continue perspective, right? So what you just need to do is just practice it, right? Play around with figures and everything. You get it. Question. Okay, Chinazom, your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I've submitted my assignment. That's number one. Okay. Secondly, I just I noticed that indentation is very, very important here. Like, it's another key here because I was writing code. I was just seeing a lot of things. Then secondly, maybe you can throw more light on how we indent, especially that double for loop and all those stuff. Then secondly, how do we, because I when I was doing research, I saw that we have like 2 type of input. The one you just did today is just like is a separate, like from what I see, so I don't know if you can like throw more light, like the proper, way we can just, on a simpler way, we can just do the input scan or something, or input read, that one is like confusing.
Okay. You said secondly like 3 times. Okay, the first one, your assignment has been submitted, right? That's fine. Now, yes, indentation is actually very important. Now the thing is this, on this platform, right? If you notice, the indentation is actually automated. All I just need to do is click enter after I type and it indents it for me, right? But if you're using a platform where it doesn't auto indent, you can actually set it. Well, Android Studio and most platform IDEs, they do that for you. But when we're using Playground, right, you have to. So what helps you in your indentation is using the tab key, right? Tab. So you do this like a tab key, where you press your tab key, so it indents it for you, right? That's how you can actually just do your own indentation. If for some reason you're writing your code that's not on an IDE that has been set up to help you with auto indentation, which this particular one has actually been set up for, right? Okay, so for what was the other one you said?
The inputs.
Okay, so for the input, right? What exactly is it? So is it that you want us to
Like,
go at it again, or
like just go at it, like let me see like how I will input something, and I want to know. I'm noting everything down. I want to write it down.
okay. Okay. Let me go a bit, right? Okay. So let me just let's comment this out, right?
Please,
Okay,
how
so
do
I'm
you
not
comment? How
going
do
to
you
go up,
comment?
right?
How do you
Let's
select
just
and comment?
when you select, right, control and your backslash.
Okay.
Yeah, control backslash. Okay, so let's see, right? Print line, enter your name, right? So when you want to read input from the user, right, you read and of course you store it in a variable, right? So you just actually what you just need to use is read line, right? And then can now print let's just use a string stuff, hello name, so that you guys get used to it, right? So when we run this, first of all, it should, I hope we don't have anything above here. Okay. So first of all, it shows you hello name, right? Hello, sorry, enter your name. sorry. So the reason you're seeing -4 here is because there's already an input here. So let me say China's some. So when you enter the input here and then you run it, if you're using other platforms, whatever output it's giving, it will actually prompt you to there will be a cursor that shows you that you can actually type, right? So all you have to do is type. So this is how you actually do it. It's actually simple, right? But of course you could also read integers, right? So you could read. I could do something like this. I'm trying to, it's actually been a while. So let's say to int, right? So it's more like you want to convert it to int, and then I want to do, so let's say age, right? Enter your age. And then I want to, let's say I want to do I want to calculate something, right? I could say 2023 minus age, right? Okay. So whenever you're getting anything, your input comes as a string. So you have to convert it. Yeah, so I need to know, okay, so we have error here, only save. Okay, only save. So this is actually a null pointer error. So you see it a lot. I think I remember telling you as we can use the question mark, right, for this, right? So this is just to tell the compiler that, look, hey, this guy can actually get a null. It's possible that he gets a null, right? So type mismatch, inferred type is int, right? But we are getting that. So you can see that the inferred type, basically what this is saying, this is taking us to debugging, but it's also good. You learn. So inferred type means that, look, here, because I've said that I could get a null, it means that this is now a nullable type. We talked about nullable type. But this is a nullable integer type because we're converting it to int, right? So it also means that here we're trying to now do a subtraction here, but it's showing us that first of all, let me take this out because it seems this compiler actually, their platform runs this automatic stuff. Okay, so here, well, it's showing us that there's an error in this age. And what's the error? It said type what mismatch. The inferred type is what int with this question mark, but it saw what int. So it's the inferred type is a nullable int, right? But what it's getting is what just an int. So that's the whole concept of null check. We talked about null. So basically how I can solve that is I'll first of all check if age is not equal to null. This is just like a check. And then if it is not equal to null, I will then print this. But if for some reason I get a null, then I just want it to print invalid inputs, right? So let's run this now and let's see. So enter your age. So you see invalid input because nothing has been entered here. So but if I say 1976, right, and run it, we should see hello 2023 minus 1976, which is what, 47, right? So the idea of, like I said, the idea of having to is just a null check, right? Because I think I told you before, right? And you will actually show it. I'll show it out when we start building an application. I'll show you. You actually see this when we start working on an app. No, it's possible. Like I said, if you open your calculator now, right? Your calculator application, it's empty at the first instance. You have not typed in any word, right? When you click enter, some persons will just click equal to equality sign. They want to calculate. So, but you have not entered anything yet. So how do you want to calculate something from nothing? But of course, users can be very funny, right? Of course, you build applications and you have to check these things. Okay, think about it. When you go to your ATM to withdraw, right, and you slot in your card, let's assume you put your PIN, you have entered and everything, you want to now withdraw, right? They now ask you for your actual, let's say they ask you for your PIN. or let's say the very first time you put in the card, they ask you for PIN, right? And instead of putting the 4-digit PIN, you just click the OK, the green button. What happens? You understand? They prompt you because they can't use, that's a null. You have not given them a value. They can't use that nothing to do anything. They cannot log you in to your account to perform any transaction because you did not give them anything, right? And that could actually crash your application if you don't take care of it. So just imagine how you feel when I walk up to you on your birthday, right? I walk up to you and tell you I have something for you, and you're just so excited. And then I open my hands and you see nothing. What do you do with such information, right? So in order to avoid crashes and to avoid, so what Kotlin does is this: okay, tell me ahead of time that it is possible that you will not give me anything. So imagine I just telling you ahead of time, it's your birthday, I may not give you anything. No. So if I don't give you, it's a bit bearable, right? It's a bit bearable because you gave me heads up that it's possible. So, but I'll now have to check. If you don't give me anything, how would I feel? We see a lot of these things that coding and all those stuff like that. It's human beings. Of course, we train a computer. We actually train a machine. We give it the logic, right? So if I tell you ahead of time that I may not give you something, if on your birthday I don't give you something, right? You're ready to an extent. You should have been prepared for it. So you don't already think, okay, well, if you don't give me anything, it's fine. I will understand. Else, if you give me something, I'll do this. So there's already a reaction set in place for nothing and for something. We need that to avoid what in programming, to avoid crash, in real life to avoid beef, right? To avoid the person not being happy with you, right? That's the concept of null and all those stuff. I think this is actually a better way to explain null. So I don't know if that. So this is actually how you should how you can read input, right? Another way to solve this, you can also do, there's this to int or null. This is also another way, right, to actually do that whole check, right? So whether it is actually an integer or it is a null, right, you can actually just do that. So we're basically just converting whatever it is to an int or to a null, depending on what the user actually enters. Okay, so that's that, right? Chinazom, I don't know if you're okay.
Yeah, thanks, boss.
Okay. Any other question?
Sir, please, I wanted to ask if there will be corrections on our tax, like if we'll have
Yeah,
like
yeah.
correct a
I
set.
wanted to do that, but you guys came a bit late. I wanted to do that before the start of class, but you guys came a bit late. So let's see. Probably over the weekend, if one or two persons can come on the call. We still have a lot to cover, right? So I will try. I know we did it the last time, but it's actually eating into our time and what we have to accomplish. So if we can find any other time, right, and we could just use that to review um any assignments that has been given, right? It could be on a Saturday, could be on a Sunday, maybe just 1 hour or 30 minutes. I'm fine, right? So if you guys should go and figure that out. What day, but let it be in the evening, right? Not in the morning. Let's say 7, 8, right? Saturday or on Sunday, whichever one, right? We can just have a review of any task that's been given. So, but you guys have that discussion. There's a Discord there. You guys should communicate and choose. Whenever you choose, you let me know. We'll make that work. Any other question? Okay, so in the absence of none, thank you guys very much for your time. I'm good. So we'll see next week, right? So thank you.